All right. Good night. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon in the Mirowitz Center program with Rachel Lippman. Rachel Lippman covers courts, public safety, and city politics for St. Louis Public Radio. She joined the NPR member station in her hometown in 2008 after spending 2 years in Lansing covering the Michigan Capitol and various other state political shenanigans for NPR member stations here. Rachel has an undergraduate degree from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. I don't know if I said that right. A master's in public affairs, reporting from the University of Illinois at Springfield. When she isn't busy pursuing the latest scoop, she can be found taking walks with her fiance and their dog, watching too many cooking shows on TV with a cat on her lap and wearing a mask. Please welcome Rachel.
Thank you guys. I'm really excited to be here today. Can't wait to tell you a little bit more about what it is that I do at St. Louis Public Radio and how it's changed over the last basically a year. We are marking the year point since the WHO declared the coronavirus officially a pandemic, and looking back over what we were marking as milestones at that point. I think I saw one day that the case total had reached 1,000, and everyone thought that that was going to be just a major marker and a milestone. And unfortunately, we had hit it where just 1,000 cases a day is even considered good news now. So I want to make it clear that if you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them. You don't need to hear me talking for 45 minutes, just straight at you, 45 minutes to an hour. You can put them in the chat or raise your hand or reach out to Judith or to someone somehow, and I'll make sure to answer them. So like Judith mentioned, I am born and raised in St. Louis. My parents are from New York, but they moved here in the 1970s so my dad could go to actually work at Barnes Hospital. He jokes around that he wanted to go to Boston, but they matched him with Barnes and they never left, as mostly happens sometimes in St. Louis. And aside from a period of time when I was, I don't know, 3 or 4 to maybe about the age of 6 when I wanted to be an astronaut, I really liked writing. I always enjoyed writing. My parents still have in their house a binder full of stories that I typed up on those old word processing programs that you could have as a kid on the, computers that were the size of a desk, basically. And I went back through at one point and graded them like a teacher would and gave myself A's and B's. And I got bit by the journalism bug when I realized that I could make money asking questions as well when I was in middle school and worked on their, little school newsletter, talking to all the new teachers and learning about all the fun new programs, and then went and worked on my campus, or not, excuse me, the high school newspaper. I was an editor and a reporter for them. And then I made the switch into doing broadcast when I was in college and started working for the campus radio station there, and had a lot of fun covering elections, producing my own, election shows and talk shows and anchoring and learning how to produce. And then went to grad school when I realized in 2005 that I didn't have a job and I needed one. And my alternate was to go to grad school. I'm sure some of you have heard that story from your grandkids or kids. And then in 2006, after I got out of grad school, I went up and worked in Lansing, Michigan for 2 years, covering the state capitol there, and then got the opportunity to come back to home here in St. Louis. And much as my parents did, I haven't left yet. I think I'm going to be here for the long haul unless NPR comes knocking and, offers me an amazing job there in DC. But that hasn't happened yet. So I'm thinking we'll stay here because my parents are here. My fiance's parents are here. I came by interest in writing and in journalism apparently somewhat naturally. My parents, though they are both in the medical field, were copy editors at their college paper, and just passed that on down to me. I made a career out of it. They made careers out of something different, but they're great supporters of the station. I joke around it's because they don't want me to have to move back in with them ever again. They want to keep my salary coming. So Stephen and the programmers kind of wanted me to talk a little bit about how the job has changed because everything else has changed over the last year. I was talking before we logged on. I've been doing the job of journalism from home for almost a year. If I were to be doing this, you know, if we were in person, I'd be standing in front of you and we'd be talking and interacting that way. Normally, when I look out of my window at work, our office in Grand Center has a great view of the Central West End. We can see the Chase Park Plaza. We can see the Cathedral Basilica. We can sometimes see the Clayton if it's clear enough, although we're not quite up high enough most of the time for that. We're only on the third floor. Um, for the last, 11 and a half, almost 12 months, my view has been a wooden desk. I do have a nice background, as you can see. I really do like the stained glass that's over this shoulder. But, this has been my desk and my space for the past 11 months. Have not been doing a lot in person. Are recording interviews mostly by Zoom. I've been talking to a lot of people in video squares. I've been covering a lot of meetings, watching television, basically, rather than being there in person, interacting with people off to the side. Um, it's been when we do go out, we're double masking, we're 6 feet away from people. We've got these big, long, they're called shotgun poles. They basically look like flag poles that you put a mic on, and it allows you to be 6+ feet away from the person that you're talking to. And it's been a strange year to commit acts of journalism, as I like to put it. But I think what we have been doing this year has been more important than ever because we as journalists are committing to getting out the best information and the most accurate information that we can get out at that time. And goodness knows that it has been important and key to have accurate information about what has been going on politically, what has been going on health wise, what has been going on just in general. And through all sorts of protests and reckoning over what it looks like to be equal and equitable and fair to my colleagues of color, and through a pandemic that has gotten journalists sick and gotten journalists killed, or had journalists die from it, is we've just kept on doing it because even though how we did it has changed, our mission and our point has never really changed. It's always been about using the tools that we have. And yeah, the tools look a little different, but using the tools that we have to go out and ask questions and get information and put that best information forward, whether it's on the air, online, on Twitter, you know, I know stations in Texas were doing text message setups when the big winter storm hit and people couldn't get on the air, but couldn't get online, but could get access through text messaging for their phone. So that's really who I am, is just a kid from St. Louis who liked to talk, was obnoxious, asked a lot of questions, liked to write, and figured out a way to leverage it into a pretty good job. And even over the last year, as stressful as it's been to be in a tiny little 2-bedroom South City house with 2 adults working from home and a cat who likes to interrupt Zoom meetings and a dog who likes to let us know that, he's in the basement right now, because there's 2 of us on Zoom meetings right now. But and a dog who likes to let us know when a truck and everything goes by. And did I mention we live at 2 busy intersections? So there are a lot of trucks and cars that she needs to let us know are going by. It's been a weird year, but we have figured out how to do our jobs. Um, and just keep doing them and do it in a way that we try to keep everyone safe and get the information out. So, I mean, that's really all I have. I'm usually the one who asks the questions, but I also really love answering them and talking to people about it. So, put the questions in the chat box. You can, wave your hand. You can just unmute yourself and have it be a free for all, because I don't really have much else to say other than, I'm curious what you want to know, and I'll answer the best that I can.
So does anyone, Leslie, do you John Reichman, you want
Yeah.
to unmute
I
yourself?
saw your hand there, John.
So, what's your beat? What do you cover? Jeff City? Do you cover St. Louis politics?
That's a good question. I cover a little bit of everything when I'm told to. My primary focus is local politics, especially City Hall. So, St. Louis City Hall, that's kind of where I'm most comfortable, what I know the most about. I've been told that I know how the process works better than some of the aldermen. But I've also, in the last year, started covering St. Louis County Council on a regular basis. I have covered Jefferson City before when they need. Basically when they need bodies down there. I don't know the people down there to really, I think feel comfortable down there, but I can, report on what's going on in the legislature. That was my grad school background. And I also have picked up an interest in sort of public safety and legal issues too. I find the courts just fascinating. So when I'm joking, I jokingly call them "nothing ever happens on my beats," which is a total lie because they're some of the busiest beats in this area. But I do a little bit of everything, but the primary focus is sort of local politics and public safety.
So, on local politics, there is a little bit of interest in the St. Louis City elections now.
Mm-hmm.
Be interested in comments on that. And one of my pet points of interest, even though I'm a lifelong county resident, is the proposal for the St. Louis Board of Aldermen to be cut in half,
Mm-hmm.
and how that is progressing, and if it'll happen and when it'll happen, and any comments you might have on that.
Sure. So the having of the Board of Aldermen, which was something that was approved actually many, many, many years ago, I think we're looking at 10 plus years ago now by a vote of the people, is going to go forward. There was an effort to attempt to put it back on the ballot and to have the voters reverse it. The Board of Aldermen right now is 28 members and a board president who's elected separately for a total of 29 for the tie break. The measure that was approved will take that down to 14 wards and a board president for a total of 15 representatives. And the arguments that were advanced back then was it's been the same since the city had 600, 700,000 people. And you don't need 28 representatives for what is now, we're looking at potentially below 300,000 with the next census. The arguments that have been started to advance against that is it may impact Black political power in terms of potentially the number of Black aldermen in the city, because the lower population is in North St. Louis. In order to balance out and make the wards as equal as possible, you would have to expand some of those wards much larger and potentially reduce the number of African American aldermen. And that bothers some of them who say, we need to represent our communities. We know what's going on. There is an outside chance that a new mayor could decide not to veto it and let it go on the ballot. We'll have to see whether they try and pass that again during the next Board of Aldermen session. But as of right now, the maps will be drawn after we get the census data for 14 wards. But as they say, stay tuned. Things can change. So, Myron, I think I saw, John, were those all the questions you had or anything else that I could comment on?
What about the mayoral?
It's going to be fascinating. I will be very interested to see how the racial dynamic plays out. It is a white woman and a Black woman, an alderwoman from the south portion of St. Louis. For those of you who may know where Cherokee Street is, that's sort of the center of her ward, like kind of Jefferson, Cherokee, Benton Park area. And the current treasurer of the city, Tashara Jones. I'll be interested to see what the racial dynamic is in that race, how much it comes up from looking at the results of the primary. A lot of wards that you would have expected to support one of the other candidates based on policies actually ended up supporting the alderwoman Kara Spencer. And I don't know for sure, but I'm wondering how much of a factor that was. It was because she was white, whereas the candidate who maybe aligned with them a little bit more on policy was a Black man. So that's what I'm going to be watching for.
Well, it looked from when I saw in the Post maps of the strength of their voting in the primary, and it looked like the white candidate had a very strong, very deep impact from the Central West End. And whereas the black candidate was largely, of course, the North City, but surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, it had some South City, but it was not as strong. The support was not as strong, but it was more widespread.
And something else to keep in mind there too is this was the first time in St. Louis elections where you could vote for multiple candidates in the primary. So it will be interesting to see how people in some of those South Central wards around Tower Grove Park, so Shaw neighborhood, Tower Grove South, parts of my neighborhood, Southwest Garden, where they go for which candidate they say, yes, I supported them both in the primary, I like both of their ideas, but I like this one more. My gut tells me that Tashara Jones will probably be the next mayor of St. Louis, but we have seen that's why they have the elections, is because if the elections were up to pundits, our political past would look quite a bit different. So,
Myron, did you have?
Yeah, I did. First of all, Rachel, thanks for joining us today. That's great.
It's our pleasure.
In my opinion, obviously, in national politics, the candidates, not even candidates, the Congress people are more voting for their party rather than their constituency. Is that also how you see it in Missouri or in the city of St. Louis?
I think you are that, and what's interesting is this has often fascinated me about the sort of Missouri voter behavior. You have voters who will defeat right to work, who will support increasing the minimum wage, who will support medical marijuana, who will support expanding Medicaid, and then who will support ethics reform in the Clean Missouri measure, and then we'll go and turn and vote for candidates who are working to undo those measures. And the disconnect between what voters are willing to support and what the candidates are supporting is fascinating to me. And some of that is just a lack of credible messengers for other what's what I'm looking for here? Credible messengers for other parties, systems, etc., down in some of the rural areas where literally the Republican candidate is the only one. The Democrats and other parties haven't worked to really make inroads there. So it is an interesting dynamic. And I think, yes, to some extent, it does play out in Missouri, where they are voting for what they think their constituents are going to support and want. But when you look at the issues that are getting support, and some of it is because the blue dots, Columbia, St. Louis, Kansas City, to some extent, some areas in and around Springfield, a tiny, tiny little bit. Turnout there can sometimes push the state in one direction or the other if you get enough people to vote. But in other times, yes, it is a statewide support for an issue that lawmakers are then actively working to try and undermine and undercut. So it is a fascinating observation, and I think you're right about it. And I have not yet been able to kind of explain to myself how or why it happens that they vote for what they think their constituents want, when sometimes the voting pattern on issues shows that it isn't necessarily what they are focusing on. I'm going to take a couple of questions in the chat I saw real quick from Ms. Harriet Snyder. She asked, how do you train to do what you do? How did you get your current position? And what did you major in college? So I was a journalism major at Northwestern. I'm actually wearing a Northwestern shirt right now, partially for this. That's another thing that has changed about the pandemic, is I wouldn't be able to be at work in jeans and a sweatshirt, but I figure if no one can really see me and I'm unlikely to be going out in public and interacting, if I have to go out and do interviews in person, I do get a little bit more dressed up than this. So I was a journalism major in college, and my graduate degree was also in a specific type of journalism. It was in public affairs reporting. So it was basically a deep dive into covering political issues, specifically the Illinois Capitol. But once you learn the basics, you can translate it kind of to anywhere else because you know how the systems work. A lot of journalism training, Harriet, is just getting experience. And that has been one of the barriers, unfortunately, to diversifying journalism, is that so many of the hands-on experiences, the internships, have been unpaid for so long. All of my internships that I did when I was in journalism school were unpaid. I was lucky enough that 2 of them were in St. Louis. I could live at home with my parents. I didn't have to have a job to need to work to pay the bills. And when I did take one out of state, my parents were able to support the apartment, the gas, etc., because there's no income coming in on those unpaid internships. Not everyone is lucky enough to do that, especially journalists of color or from less privileged backgrounds. So they miss out on those hands-on training opportunities. But that is how you learn what to do, is it's hands-on. They, send you out to a low stakes press conference and say, go cover this, come back, write some stories. And gradually you learn how to use the equipment. You learn the questions to ask. You learn to be completely unimpressed by elected officials. There's a funny story from when I was in Michigan. A friend of mine and I were sitting in the little press room in the Capitol talking, and we saw he was a fellow radio reporter, and we saw the governor's SUV pulled up. This was back when Jennifer Granholm was the governor of Michigan. And we both looked at each other and we went, oh, that's the governor. And grabbed our recorders and went out to start talking to her. And all of a sudden we realized there's flash bulbs going off around us. And we're like, what is going on here? We're not that cool. And we realized that it was people taking pictures of the governor, because to them, she was a superstar and someone who was amazing. And to us, it was just somebody that we talked to for our job. So you do get a little jaded every once in a while. And then you realize I get to talk to some cool people for my job. I got my current position because my former boss had heard my coverage when I was in graduate school. There was an internship component to that. He had a position open. He asked me to apply. I did it out of just, gratitude. I wasn't necessarily looking for a good job, or out of respect. I said, sure, I'll apply. You're asking me to. It didn't click that he was asking me to apply so that he could offer me the job. And the rest is history. And I've been here since August of 2008. So that is how I got my current position, and got my current beats just because I was interested in them and no one else really wanted to cover them. So that's how and why I end up sitting watching up to 7 hours of meetings at times. So, and Harriet, your other question is, what are some of the voter suppression bills that Missouri is trying to pass? I'm admittedly not as familiar with the specific legislation that Missouri is attempting to pass at that level. I leave that up to Jacqueline, our incredibly talented Jeff City reporter, because that's where her mind is, what she is focusing on. I know that they are attempting to increase the threshold that you would need for approving constitutional amendments, such as medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion, et cetera. Right now, those require just 51%. They want to make it so that we require 2/3, and that would have blocked a lot of those measures from going into effect. I know that there is a voter photo ID law that they are attempting to push through. Another one had a previous one, parts of it had been struck down by the courts. And I'm sure there are other efforts that I don't know about, but those are the 2 that I am aware of.
Leslie, I believe you might have had a question, and
Yeah.
there you go.
Yes, I do. My question is on gerrymandering, and is there any way that what people could do so that we have a more fair representation in Jeff City?
That's a good question. That had been the intent of Clean Missouri in terms of bringing the demographer in and changing the way and the intent of districts. The thing that comes immediately to mind right now is supporting candidates from I would suspect is the party of your choice in areas outside of the city. The city's going to be reliably blue. The county is probably reliably blue now. Kansas City's reliably blue. But a thing you'll hear from, especially a reporter down in Rolla, he covered one of the congressional candidates there. And he said, this candidate for the Democratic Party had a real campaign. She was out there, she was campaigning and couldn't get support, couldn't get any kind of infrastructure help. Just they didn't seem to want to expand the base. I don't know whether they had the resources or not to do it. I'm not as familiar with sort of the internal finances of what the Democratic Party would have done. But, my gut tells me that if that's, what you're looking for, is the reason that the gerrymandering happens is because of who's in charge of drawing the maps. And that's the lawmakers. And the lawmakers want to have it so that they benefit themselves and their party. So until there is no longer a supermajority of one party or the other in a state capital, and in Missouri that would be a Republican supermajority, you're likely to get maps that are going to benefit the party in power to keep them in power. That's sort of my immediate thought as to what can be done, especially because we have seen that lawmakers are willing to kind of go against voters with Clean Missouri, for example.
That was a really nasty thing that the legislature did, getting rid of the Clean Missouri anti-gerrymandering position by having the most the wording on the ballot last time to get rid of the Clean Missouri gerrymandering was so misleading and and the courts allowed it. It's just it's an embarrassment to the state. It really is.
It was accurate language in that it explained what it was that the bill would do, that the initiative would do. But what people forgot was what the status quo was. They thought that the status quo was the old system, and where lobbyists could give hundreds of thousands of dollar gifts. It reflected what the measure did, but not what the measure changed. People had forgotten what the baseline was there, and they took advantage of that. They took advantage of the fact that a lot of people aren't seeking out information about that. There are not a lot of news outlets in some of these areas, local news outlets that are reporting on the nuances and the ins and the outs. My colleague, Jason Rosenbaum, is obsessed with redistricting. He loves it. Like, it's truly a passion of his and he understands it. Not everyone has a Jason who is willing to get that into the weeds. They maybe have a small talk radio station or just a commercial FM station that reads AP wire. Or they have one reporter who's trying to cover 60 different counties and doesn't have the time to get into the weeds on that, or is 22 years old and doesn't have the background knowledge. So
Too bad.
Do we have other questions, comments? Yeah, Stephen.
I'd like to know about some of the most interesting people you've had opportunity to engage with.
Oh goodness, that's a really good question. I mean, I have covered some wonderful stories. I did one, oh goodness, I'm going to totally forget on the year, but he was a former navigator on the B-52s in World War II. And it was either B-52 or B-17. It was one of the big bombers that they've restored. And it was the first time that he had been on one of those planes. They flew him on a restored one from Lambert, or from Spirit to Lambert. The first time he had been on one since he'd been shot out of the sky over Germany. And I got to take a ride with him and hear about his experiences in World War II and just sort of see him, experiencing a flight not in combat and what it was like to be in that plane. Did a really fun story once for the 20th anniversary of the flood of 1993. So this would have been a 2013 story on two who were at the time in the National Guard. They got married during the flood of 1993. and did a story on, what their life was like 20 years later. That was just sort of a fun little story to do. It really didn't take the National Guard that long to track them down, and they were willing to participate in the story. And I had a really good time doing that. I tracked down the chaplain who had married them and talked to them. So that was fun. It's watching the sausage get made can be darkly fascinating sometimes too. You want to bang your head, and that is one of the good things about Zoom meetings is nobody can see you and you need to just bang your head on the desk in frustration. You can't really do that when you're at the actual Board of Aldermen. But it's always good to see and understand where the politicians are coming at and why they're coming at it that way. I enjoyed doing a story. This is probably also 2013-14 range, when there was a steam pipe that exploded in downtown St. Louis, and everyone's like, there's steam pipes under the city? And I'm like, what else is there under the city? Let's go find out. So I got to go into a cave, and just talking to the everyday people who, without the efforts that we made, would probably not share their stories on a regular basis. And I have colleagues who do just amazing work at, politicians are real people, but they're also super easy to get a hold of. They know how to, work the system. I've got colleagues who, make it sort of their goal to go and find the interesting stories and tell them. For what it was, the Greighton saga was fascinating to cover because there were so many characters involved with that. I'm sure seems like we're going to get to relive that all pretty soon. We'll see. But yeah, so that's just, we get the opportunity to talk to cool people. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to forget because just day in, day out, there's a lot going on. So Jonathan asked in the chat, will the legislature try to stop Medicaid expansion? I don't think they will try to stop it necessarily, Jonathan, in terms of not implementing it. What I will be interested to see is the qualifications or the restrictions or the limits or what the details of that expansion look like, how they maybe will try to control costs within how they set up the expansion of the program. I don't think it will die outright or be killed outright, but it may be sort of neglected to death, squeezed to death, as the kind of Affordable Care Act sign up period was just, I think there will be some form of Medicaid expansion. As is usual, the devil is in the details. You guys are asking some really, really good questions.
Wasn't there something in the recently that about the Medicaid expansion that they were trying to again subvert the consensus of the electorate by limiting it or just not acting on acting on it, even though there was that constitutional amendment or whatever it was that they had to accept the expansion?
It wouldn't surprise me if, like I mentioned to Jonathan, John, that, there is some kind of effort to not fully implement it. I wasn't as familiar with that issue, kind of covering it during the election to know what the mechanism is in the constitutional amendment to say if it's not implemented by the legislature, X, Y, or Z happens. They still do have a few weeks left of the session. I'll be curious to see what they do. They have a couple months left, actually. Last week of session is usually right around this time in May. So it'll be, I feel for all of the Jeff City reporters. I imagine that there is going to be a lot of late nights, a lot of lifting, a lot of hearings that they'll all be covering. And we do have one of the best covering that for us for Jacqueline. So that's going to be something she'll definitely be paying attention to. Go ahead, Myron.
Yeah, I may be wrong on this, but wasn't there a bill introduced or something like that to allow weapons or guns or whatever back on public transportation? What is the status of that right now?
I believe it has passed the House. which is not that surprising. You'll find that a lot of stuff gets out of the House and then runs into opposition in the Senate, and they just choose not to take it up because they don't want to risk filibusters by various parties. I was actually in Jeff City last year when it was the Republicans who were filibustering a measure, not the Democrats. So it was kind of one filibuster after another. But yes, there is legislation out there in the House that would expand and allow guns on public transportation systems in the state. And I think the status of that is, I know it has passed the House. I could not specifically tell you where it is in the Senate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Leslie?
Since you do a lot with the city, what do you think about the crime situation, and what could be done about it?
Oh, wow. If I had the answer to that question, I, would be selling the solution and not making public radio money, which is, which we can live on, but it's certainly not network anchor pay. I think there's a lot of different factors there. A story that I'm kind of exploring is what the city does about solving its homicides, and they're not great at it. Spoiler alert. And I think that plays into it a little bit, is that the need for vigilante or street justice, because you don't believe you can get justice from the justice system. Some of that is skill level of the department. Some of that is just mistrust with the police department. They don't want to go to the police department and give information. A lot of it is poverty, is people just trying to make a buck how they can. Drug trade, drug interactions, that's a dangerous business. Some of it is just the violence around people. They feel the need to be protected and carry a gun. So arguments escalate a lot faster. So I think some of the access to guns, whether it's stealing them, acquiring them illegally, just because there are so many guns out there in the St. Louis area and in Missouri because of Missouri's lax gun laws. I think, like I said, mistrust of the police plays a role in it. I think, decades of neglect of those areas plays a role in it, because, poverty can lead to crime, and it escalates from there. So it's, getting everyone on the same page and trying to address those issues, figure out, do you have the staff, the police in the right places? Do you have the right people in the right places within the police department? I think people understand what the problem is. It's just whether there are the right people in place to solve that issue. And I think it gets blown somewhat out of proportion. I think there are plenty of areas in the city where people are genuinely in danger because of the violence. But my general thought is, I do not feel nervous walking around in my neighborhood that I'm going to be the random target of a murder. Most murders in the city, most homicides in the city are between people who are at least indirectly known to each other, their acquaintances, etc. A lot of it's connected to the drug trade. Not involved in that. Like I said, public radio doesn't pay network salary, but I don't have to supplement my income that way. So yeah, that is, I think the problem in this and what it causes it is well known. It's just getting the situation kind of under control and dealing with that. Jonathan, yes, to answer your question, I will be moderating helping moderate the KETC debate. As for what happened with the timing, I have literally no idea. I don't know whether candidates, we asked them to commit so early, they forgot to put it on the calendar. We committed before the primary. I don't know. I'm glad it got straightened out. I'm not going to lie, if we hadn't done it, I wouldn't mind not going on TV, but I'm glad that we are having an opportunity for as many people as possible to access and hear from the candidates. But I genuinely have no idea what happened. I'm not in those campaigns. The first time I heard about it was when one of the producers emailed the whole big group of us and was like, oh, are we going to need to reschedule the debate? So you know, now we have 2 debates hosted by great news organizations that are going to attract different audiences. And like I said, the more people who have an opportunity to hear from their potential elected officials, I think the better. So.
Wonderful questions.
Yeah.
I think we're doing great.
Yeah, you guys are all reporters now. I'm scared for my job.
So can you put your editorial hat on a bit and talk about the St. Louis Police Department and what is the racial, is there a racial disparity there? Is there a confliction? I still can't get beyond they having 2 unions for the policemen, a black union and a white union. It is just incomprehensible that we should allow something, the city should allow something like that. And they have it for the fire department too, if I'm correct.
I believe the fire department has changed a little bit over the years. That fire, which is the Black Firefighters Union, and Local 73, which is the sort of representative union, have not joined forces but are less at odds. They seem to have sort of gotten themselves on the same page. To clarify a little bit about what John is talking about, for both the fire department and the police department, there is one bargaining unit. There's one sort of official union that sits and negotiates at the table with the city for things like benefits, promotions, etc. There has been within both the fire department and the police department, and that's true for the city police department and the county police department, a separate it's kind of a representative advocacy group. They don't have bargaining rights, but called the Ethical Society of Police, who has been the advocacy and representative group for officers of color, advocating for equality in promotions, advocating for equality in treatment. You know, to answer your question, just based on the raw numbers, yes, John, there is a disparity in the city of St. Louis. The city itself is slightly more white than black. I think it's about 52-48 now, but it's close to a majority black city, and the department has maybe 30% black officers. So there's certainly a disconnect there. And the leadership of the union is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male. And, you know, and I think overwhelmingly hostile to reform. And when you have that as sort of the basis for the official union, then inequities are going to get negotiated into contracts because they aren't necessarily looking out for officers and of color, minority officers, black officers, Hispanic officers, etc. So my, you know, completely off the record opinion is that the union, the official union, the St. Louis Police Officers Association, does not help itself by having its current spokesperson and business manager where they do. I think they would serve themselves quite a bit if they eliminated him as a public mouthpiece, but he is also hired by the union. So it does make you wonder and question whether he is just advocating for his own attention or if he believes that he is actually advocating for the beliefs of his members. And we have seen with the Capitol insurrection and, you know, Blue Lives Matter flags, other sort of symbolism that has gotten tied into white nationalist movements, that he may not be, it may not be the majority of views within the department, but it also may not be outliers of views. So I think the answer is yes, there are some issues within the police department because of what the union has negotiated into and tried to protect officers that benefit white officers as opposed to black officers, perhaps. So,
You know, there's no solution.
not an easy one for sure. It's, you know, and like I said, people getting paid a heck of a lot more than me haven't figured out the problem yet. There's no easy solution for sure. But yeah. Any last questions? You guys are asking some really good ones.
I got a million of them.
Oh, I'm sure.
How are you in St. Louis County? It looks like St. Louis County Council and the county executive are on different warpaths.
That has been, to me, just the most fascinating self-inflicted wound possible. And I've brought this up with many people. I cannot figure out what the play was other than just for sheer maintaining power that isn't really a powerful position. The county chair does not have much say. It's sort of, he or she is kind of a separate among equals. They are promoted kind of from within their own council to be sort of a presiding officer. They do not have a ton of control over the legislative agenda. The Board of Aldermen president position actually in the city is much, much more powerful when it comes to legislation. So to alienate somebody who you will need to advance any of your legislative agenda from the start by leaving them out of a council election, I did not understand that. I still cannot figure out how that was politically savvy. And maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe it is just a pure power play. I want to stay in power. I want the title. But that has also baffled me. But the division that you are pointing out as the council, kind of begins to fracture along these 4-3 lines, it's not unusual. It usually has to do with the county executive more than anything. It's usually not a partisan line. You saw that with Stanger too. The council kind of began to fracture along lines of people who were supporting him and didn't support him. So it's not uncommon, but I think it was, the current split was just unnecessarily done. And I was fascinated with Chairman Rita Days' appearance on St. Louis on the Air yesterday, that she said she had not heard from the county executive for months now. So I don't know. Politics and power make people do weird things, John. That's my guess.
Well, do we have some, I'm not sure that we have more questions. If we do.
I don't see any more in the chat, Judith, but any last questions? They don't even have to be about politics. I'll treat this like a Reddit AMA. Ask me anything.
Wow.
I think we've got the answers
Thank
for
you.
today. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. And
Absolutely.
what a lively,
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we had a really lively question and answer session, and I'm so happy everyone was here, and we really appreciate you. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I was glad to do it. Have a good day, everyone. Be safe.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.